Good morning, everyone. We'll give folks just a minute to jump on and we'll get going on today's peer learning session. We're very excited to have three great presenters here today for our program peer learning rapid rehousing. Just a little housekeeping as we get started. You'll note that you were muted on entry, but we can always have questions as we go. So feel free to add questions in the chat box and we can also unmute you to ask questions. We are recording today, so if you have colleagues that miss out on today, we can, or if you want to review the materials, we'll have those available very soon. Just a reminder, we have everything posted and we'll have this recording posted on our website. Just a quick review of our plan for today. We will introduce our panelists and they will provide some program overviews. We'll have a panel discussion, so a guided conversation with questions that we've prepared, and then time for you all to ask questions. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end, just chat your questions as you go. Then, as always, we'll do our quick meeting survey at the end and talk about what's next for Lift Academy. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce today's presenters. Ramsey Ferguson with Housing Connector, Paul Stockwell with Hilltop, and Christian Bellman with Manna. And I believe we're going to cue it up to you first, Paul.
Right. All right. Thanks, everybody. My name's Paul. I'm with Hilltop, and we cover Montrose, Delta, and Mesa County are our primary counties. I've been with Hilltop for 11 years in various roles. I started as a part-time employee just doing juvenile intake screening for the 7th Judicial District on our Colorado Youth Detention Continuum, and liked the organization and stuck around and have had several roles through the years. Mainly centered around direct client and assisting people with child support issues, which also included some housing instability. Right now, I'm currently the Hilltops program manager for a number of our housing programs uh, in Montrose, Delta, and Mesa County. So Hilltop is a larger organization. I just wanted to do a brief overview of Hilltop because we do a lot of different things. Our mission is we create connections to build a community where everybody belongs. And some of our values are relationship, integrity, growth, inclusivity, courage, and fun. And if you notice my slide, I have one slide today. And so like my picture with the scarecrow. So it happened that we generally have stuff revolving around the seasons, and so one year I put together a scarecrow to have, and the scarecrow actually ended up in different people's offices over the few months to scare them when they came into the office, and it worked really well. And so my favorite value for Hilltop is fun, and we try to do that a lot. We try to do little things that really help to support the people and the work they're doing, and then just kind of break up the day. So one of my favorites, and we just did it a few weeks ago, is we had an area scavenger hunt where we send people out into the community to take pictures, to answer riddles, and basically it's attended by a lot of the staff in Montrose, which has been for, I think this was our third year. And people just run out the door and they run around and collect everything they need and hopefully come back and win and have a prize. So that's just part of what Hilltop is as a larger organization. We have a lot of programs covering Mesa, Montrose, and Delta County. It's a pretty wide area. That includes a lot of family development programs like Before Babies and Parents as Teachers, and we have a fatherhood program. We also offer intensive family navigation, programs like collaborative management program, which brings together large, like the region service providers to work with individual participants, meeting with a single meeting to meet with multiple people. We do have two senior living facilities in Grand Junction. We also have a life adjustment program for people with traumatic brain injuries, and that's also in Grand Junction. And then we also operate Latimer House, which is intimate partner violence and sexual assault, and that includes a safe house. Those are just a few of the programs. There's a lot more, but a lot of programs center around how we can assist and help families with children, fathers, non-custodial parents, as well as custodial parents, and really just trying to affect, a family from the start. And we kind of say we help people from infancy through senior living because we cover stuff in all of those different areas. So my role as program manager for housing, we cover a lot of programs and specifically in Montrose and Delta, and we are focused a little bit more in those areas on homeless prevention and rapid rehousing services. We have several grants that cover those, and we do have one grant that allows us to help with homeless families in Mesa County. So we kind of delve into that realm in that area as well. We utilize person-centered care and trauma-informed care to guide our engagement with participants. Many have a lot of barriers, as you might know, and we work to walk alongside them and provide support. And really, for me, the engagement starts as soon as they walk in the door. So being part of the Family Resource Center Association, we have really the support staff when people first enter the door are trained very well how to engage with anybody that comes in. And so I say that, their engagement starts as soon as they walk in the door to one of our offices. And that frontline staff is there to invite them in, listen to what their situation might be, and then try to guide them to services that might assist them. And we also do things like where we just have days, we have a walk-in Wednesday where anybody can come in for any reason. We do kind of a quick triage and we get them connected with people that can assist. So that could be, we do see a lot of people that come in to that for housing or they're at risk of losing their housing. So those are the main categories that we're seeing. Um, when I was new at Hilltop, one thing that I can remember when I started like right away was some trainings that we had. And in those trainings, something really like always stuck out to me. It was this idea that when a participant comes in the door, and we're actually meeting with them, this thought that are they more likely or less likely to return because of our interaction? So I really try every time I meet with somebody, whether that's a participant, a community member, organization, I always kind of come back to that. That always comes up in my mind. So I tried to enter every meeting with that thought in mind, like, how did this interaction go? Is this person more likely to come back and talk with us? So as I mentioned, we'd also offer, we do have some supportive housing stuff that's happening in Grand Junction. Currently, we have a 40-unit permanent supportive housing complex in Grand Junction called Pathways Village. It's kind of a collaborative effort between Hilltop, there's an outside property management company, and Homeward Bound, as well as the Grand Junction Housing Authority. And so we work really closely together. Hilltop provides the actual support. So we have navigators located on site to provide those supports to any of those people. There's also a similar project called Laurel House that's for youth, which is operated really pretty closely in the same fashion where there's people on site to provide support for the people coming in. And we're that's an interesting one, I would say. The permanent supportive housing is very interested because working where somebody lives kind of brings on a whole nother level of intricacy. And it's really I've spent actually over the last year, I spent a lot of time out there. There is a lot of folks that really care and have lived there for a long time and care so much about how that place operates. And it's really just good to get out there and talk with people. And these people are all came from chronic homelessness. We utilize them a lot for like just our general information, those stories, that information you receive from a person that has this long-standing lived experience of homelessness, and we bounce tons of ideas off of them. We ask them for their input on a lot of things, and that's gone really well. There's, of course, always some things that go really well, and other things we got to get back to the drawing board on. So that has been an interesting journey at Pathways for sure. But I can see there's real value in the support that gets provided to the folks after their house because a lot of them are coming from chronic homelessness, and I think that translates really well to a lot of our rapid rehousing programs, where we can take some of the information we learned from that supportive housing and transfer that when we're getting people into people off of the streets through rapid rehousing in some of the things that we're working and supporting them with ongoing. So we are also very much a rural community. Grand Junction a little bit less, but in Montrose and Delta, we're a lot more rural. So we have many challenges, that are just similar to every other rural community in the area, really on the western slope. And those things really kind of surface as lack of affordable housing a lot of times. And what is affordable housing? Like I always ask that question because it's such a moving target. Um, the rents have increased quite a bit. We also kind of have stagnating wages. They're pretty much the same as they've been for a while. So when you combine kind of the lack of affordable housing with lack of wage increase, kind of creates, a perfect storm to make it a little bit harder and create some barriers for people. Um, Our area has seen lots of build projects. I mean, we get over the last few years, we've seen our housing authority and some other folks, go after quite a few housing, like building some affordable housing, um, which is great. We love that. Like whatever we can add to the system, we are so thankful that there's people out there like doing those big build projects, because they take a long time and there's a lot of work that goes into them. And there's a lot of collaboration between um, project managers and the cities and all of the infrastructure that needs to go in. But it is a hard, like some of those projects, since they do take a while, very low income places do seem to go very fast. So that's another challenge that we see as well is that once the places are available, you have so many people trying to apply for those. It's very competitive. It's sometimes it takes a long time. And I've always kind of been under the impression that like really you don't it's really hard to build yourself out of homelessness. Like there's just not enough resources in the system overall for smaller areas to be able to build as much as we actually need. Um, but we're slowly working on that. And I think that's a combination of things and why I feel like we're a little lucky with having both homeless prevention and rapid rehousing funds because we can really help people on both sides of the coin. Like I feel like for the Montrose and Delta areas, sometimes it's much easier to keep somebody in the housing that they're in than it is to go out and find something else that's affordable. So it is nice to have some of those options. Um, so we do also do a fair amount of work just within the homelessness response system as well. Hilltop's been one of the main facilitators for our regional coordinated entry case conferencing, probably over the last, I want to say it's like the last three to 4 years. So we're very connected with that. And that's grown quite a bit. It started off as kind of just a very small meeting with a couple people in it, and slowly over time, it's grown to include more of the counties that we cover, including some of the outlying counties like Gunnison County and Ouray County, and sometimes San Miguel County. Which, if you're not familiar with the Western Slope, um, it's spread out. Like those counties, although they're kind of under our economic development region, it's really far to get to those. And so we do have a weekly just online case conferencing meeting. It just helps to allow people to come in whenever they can. It's been very supported by, I would say there's about 8 to 10 folks that are always there that are very committed, that have a lot of information to provide and a lot of people that they're working with that we do a lot of brainstorming on and trying to figure out what resources as well as how can we collaborate. I think one really good thing that has come out of that is like our connection with our local HUD Vash person. That relationship has really grown over the years where we have been able to help and assist some with some of the stuff that they're doing to help with arrears balances for some of their people so that landlords would be able to actually put them into a different housing. So that's another thing that we kind of have here is there's several very large property managers. And so if you kind of screw up with one of them, it can follow you for a while, like they know. And if they have such a large housing stock, we have to kind of go back to them and try to negotiate something if they have rental arrears balances that are kind of the barrier for them. But with some of the veterans, they do seem more willing to work with us on those, especially when we're kind of doing it in tandem with our HUD-VASH person. So, and then just a little bit of a shout out. We do have some very major partners in our areas. So in Montrose, Shepherd's Hand Day Shelter, they provide a lot of the basic needs services. They do breakfast and lunch Monday through Friday. They also operate a seasonal shelter. So they are about a block and a half away from where our Hilltop office is in Montrose. So we have lots of participants in common. We send people back and forth a lot. They're sending us people for housing. We're sending them people for that emergency shelter or food needs. And so that has been, well, the person that runs that is a former employee of Hilltop. So that's always makes it a little bit easier. And then we also have Riverbend Resources in Delta and the Crisis Prevention Unit in Delta. We've worked with them over the last three-ish years. I think they're also a Thor grant recipient. And we've just built on. So they're under the city of Delta. And so they've really started tackling street outreach and there's lots of resource development within the Riverbend resources and they just recently at the beginning of May opened their shelter after the winter shelter in Delta closed and so we'll continue to work with them. It's been a great relationship. Our housing navigator in Delta works with them a lot just to really work with the people that are coming in for their resources and trying to get them connected with also like the housing resources that Hilltop has. So um, all in all, we're doing a lot. There's a lot of different stuff happening, and well, I think some of the questions that we'll go through will cover some of the specific program stuff a little bit more thoroughly. But that's kind of Hilltop overview, I would say. And I think I'm a little over time, so I will I will give it back to you, Rebecca.
You are not. And Paul, to say there's a lot going on feels like an understatement. So thank you for that great
Yeah.
overview. I think we all learned a lot, and I just appreciate the scarecrow picture because I know the fun that you like to have. I just haven't seen the scarecrow picture before. So it's a great reminder, I think, for all of us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christian.
Hi everybody, my name is Christian Bellman. I'm here to talk about our rapid housing at Mana Soup Kitchen. So our team is comprised by myself, Christian. I wrote data and payments. I used to be what my coworker Karen is right now, the housing stability case manager. But since we hired her, now I'm more on the back side of things, putting intra data, making sure that everybody gets their rent payment due and their utilities. Danielle McDonald, she is the resource center director here at our organization, and she overviews our program. And Marisa Hunt, she is one of the co-secretary directors, the other one being Chris, but she is also involved in our rapid housing. So with the help of all of them, we have weekly meetings to make sure that everybody that we're served in our caseload is up to date with their payments, with their goals. It's just like a small collaborate team to make sure that we are doing our part in helping them become self-sustainable by the end of the program, and also to make sure where they are in each of the goals. Uh, so we are located in Durango, Colorado, in the southwest. So we mainly serve La Plata County. But if a person finds, like, let's say, housing in the surrounding areas, Cortez, in Silverton, that in Pagosa Springs, that would be Montezuma County, Archuleta County, San Juan County. We can also help with that. We are funded through the Homeless Resolution Program, HRP, and the Transformational Homelessness Response, THR program. That's where our funding comes from. So Mana. So Mana started about 4 years ago. It was, as the name implies, a soup kitchen. It was mainly open to serve hot meals to people. And it started when here in La Plata County, a woman starved to death. It was in a wintertime, but she didn't die of hypothermia or due to the cold. She actually died of starvation. So on that day, members of a church, they decided that this was never going to happen ever again in our community. So they founded what's now Mana. But they started serving hot meals in a church, in a parking lot. Before they came to our actual location, they opened kind of like cafeteria setting, and then our previous good secretary director and Morse applied to different grants, work with the city, and develop what Mana is already in the presence, which is a resource center. So now Mana, in addition to the hot meals that we serve Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., we have groceries that people can call. We call it shopping, but in reality, everybody can come here and get meat, dairy, vegetables that we grow in our own garden, and they're free. We don't charge anybody. They can use the market as many times as they need, unlike the food bank, which I believe it's 2 times per week. We also, so Mana turned also more like in a hub. After we open and after reputation go around that this is where a lot of our community folks come in, other organizations start coming in using our facilities to have office hours to offer the services. So we have people from Access, case workers who help participants get enrolled on Medicaid, provide veterans outreach, like all stuff from, depending on the case manager from Access. We have dental clinic called Painted Sky Dental. It's a non-profit, and she comes here in her van and provides cleanings and other services to participants who either don't have insurance or who have Medicaid. We have the workforce. We have La Plata Health Department performing HIV screening and Hep C screenings and other harm reduction. So it's a place where everybody converges from partners to participants. So how does that relate to Bridge to our rapid housing program? So in addition to the whole food and partnership, we have a culinary class too. So I forgot to add that into the slide. Participants can get enrolled in I believe it's 4 or 6 weeks program in a culinary class, and by the end they get a food handler certification, so they even can work at the restaurant after they are done with our classes here. So one of the services that we provide here regarding housing assistance is using our own funds, Mana's funds. We can provide assistance to pay for security deposits. In fact, we are like only one or two out of two agencies in the region who can help with security deposits. We can help with back rent, application fees, utility assistance payment, and also we help fill out government housing applications. We, in fact, have all the surrounding subsidized and low income housing here, Lumion, Mercy Housing, Cedar Views, Miramonte, all of those. So, and and that's even without talking about rapid housing. So we also have homeless prevention, which is a program as an Emmy plans that helps people before they are homeless to keep their housing. We can help up to with 3 months in background and 3 months after we get them enrolled for like a total of like 6 months. So rapid housing falls in all of this by selecting folks through our coordinated entry system. So for those who might not be familiar with what coordinated entry is, so coordinated entry is a meeting where every month housing providers come together to discuss which organization has what program, and also to select people for one of these housing assistance programs, which can be rapid housing, primary supported housing, bridge housing. So in order to be eligible for rapid housing, you have to meet two criteria. One, you have to meet the definition of literal homelessness according to HUD, which is either living in your car, camping outside, be in a shelter, or in a place not meant for human habitation. So you can be in an abandoned building, or you can be in a trailer with no running water or no electricity, and that's still, even though you have a roof on your head, it's not habitable for human habitation, so you will still be considered homeless. And you also would need to be on the 30% AMI income. If you meet those two criteria and then you get selected through coordinated entry, then you you will be eligible for our cases, rapid housing. So it is very the integration of this program into what Mana does is very organic because, as I said, in the way that Mana has evolved, providing services from food to connection to partners, we can also help people get their ID. If so, people who get into a program sometimes they don't even have a social security card, an ID, or a birth certificate, which you need to find employment. So we get work on those three things. We If they have a car, we can provide them with gas cards, we can provide them with bus passes, and that is all integrated into the work that we do at Mana. When we started our rapid housing, we didn't have our bridge program, which it's of huge help because what happened in the past is that a person was homeless, so they were camping, and it would be really hard for us to get a hold of them or find them, or for them to make their appointment, or they would lose their stuff because they will leave their camp, and then when they go back, their stuff would be stolen. So it was really hard to work towards getting housing when they were in such a vulnerable situation. But now with our own bridge housing program, we are able to put people into an actual place, into an apartment where they can rest, where they can keep their stuff, and we know where they are, so we can go there and check it, and then it makes easier the progress towards finding them an apartment. Um, yeah. So what's the next slide? Is there any? Is it set? No. Okay. So some of the successes that we have here at Rapid Housing is to see the participants becoming self-sustainable. So in fact, one of our biggest successes is a single mom with two children who went through our own Rapid Housing assistant, and she is now a property manager. And she is also one of our partners. And it is having her being our one of our participants to be in that position really helps because she really understands what it is like. And she tells us, like, I know a lot of landlords, they don't want to rent to people coming from Mana because of the reputation that we have. They say they don't want to deal with a lot of the homeless population, but I've been there, and I know that the program works, and I know that not everybody is. So it carries a lot of stigma, and she knows, and she educates all the landlords on that false stigma. So she's a great success. She helps us, she helps the participants, and she's very vocal about how these programs works when you utilize them and you work with your caseworkers. Other success stories we have is people, yes, people has become so sustainable, meaning they're able to pay their rent. Other ones, we have people who are seniors, they can no longer work, they're on Social Security, but before the end of the program, we're able to get them connected with government housing, which they pay 30% of their income. So by the end of our program, they're instead of ending in homelessness or in a place that they can no longer afford, they are put into these places where they can be there until they want or they move out. But yeah, the challenges. So I wrote this enrollment of families because that encapsulates pretty much everything. So sometimes, unfortunately, we do our best to work with our families, and this is we've seen this mostly in people that are not, so I was talking I'm gonna go back a little bit into the coordinated entry. So I was saying that coordinated entry is for to select people for housing programs, and there are different housing programs. One is rapid housing, and the other one is permanent supported housing. So permanent supported housing is more for people who have been chronically homeless. They have a disability, they can work, like they have all these needs that they're not gonna be successful if we put them into like a place of rapid housing. And from my experience working at Mana for the past 4 years, is that sometimes folks whose needs are greater than rapid housing, they're the ones that tend to, I would say, fail in the program, either because the transition is too harsh. You know, if you've been homeless for 1 to 2 years or more, the transition into housing is really hard. People really value their freedom. So when you put into an apartment, they want to have the same freedom as they have been having people over, being awake late at night, sound. So it's really hard, the transition. And some landlords, they don't want to work with it, or they hear a lot of complaints, and then they ask people to evict them. In other more extreme cases, there's like some substance use, and participants have a really hard time admitting it. So people can be in our program even if they're going through substance use, alcohol or drugs. It doesn't matter. We can help them. We in fact, that's another interaction program. At Mana, we have a program, peer support, where we can meet with a case manager that can help them get connected with a recovery clinic. So it's not an issue. The issue comes when we have open conversations and participants then they don't admit to the use, and it comes to the point that it's evident that there is some use. The landlords, there's conversations, there's a lot going on, and even though we try to address the issue, we do intermediate with the landlords, and we do a lot of case management. It ends with evictions or it ends with disarrangement because of missed appointments, cancellations, there's no progress. So a rapid housing, there's, as I was saying at the beginning, there are goals that you gotta meet. Like at the end of 3 months, you gotta find employment. At the end of like 4 months, you have to work towards something. And for people who have struggled with substances, they miss their appointments, they don't engage. Engagement is a huge responsibility for a program. So we have to follow our guidelines and disenroll them, which is very unfortunate. So disenroll more families, evictions, I touch base on that, and background and cost of living. That one is huge. So if we have a person coming, well, they have everything ready. They have the ability to work. They don't struggle with substance use. They don't have a disability, but they have a serious criminal record. It is extremely hard to find them housing in the area. And because we live in a rural area, Durango, Colorado, there is not really a lot of options for government housing. So the background is huge. And if you add that to government housing, I haven't seen anybody with a background of like assault or violence getting into government housing. Even the church is being 10 or 7 years in the past. So it really puts a barrier for them to find permanent housing. And the cost of living, yeah, everybody knows it. So there's instances in which our folks do everything they can. They have a job, but it's not the best paying job, and they have to still pay their rent. So this is tricky. I don't wanna sound too negative on this part because there was a case in which a person did everything that he was required of the program. He got a job, he paid his rent, he paid his utility, but when he got full-time employment, he lost his Medicaid. And he had diabetes. He had like a condition that he needed medicine. So he couldn't pay for his medicine. He we have to get him enrolled. We tried to get him enrolled in another insurance program, and at the end of the day, that was not enough. So what he had to do was go to part-time to be able to get enrolled back in Medicaid, and but he didn't have enough money like to pay his rent and all that. So it was a huge struggle in this area, the cost of living and the backgrounds. But other than that, I think the program works. Every success that we have, such as the person that is a property manager, shows that if we both work together, the participant and folks at Rapid Housing and our community departments, we really can help people become self-sustainable at the other programs, and they can contribute to the community, like this person is helping us get other participants housed in one of her properties.
Thank you,
Mm.
Christian. And I just want to say today I learned the origin story of manna, and so that was so moving, and it's amazing to see how you all have expanded your services over time. So thank you for sharing and filling us in a little more on your rapid rehousing program. That challenges topic that you had at the end a lot about landlords. So what a great segue to turn it over to Ramsey.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Christian, were you reading my slides before? Hi everyone. Such a pleasure to be here today, and like such a privilege to be sharing space with both you, Paul, and Christian. It was really wonderful to hear about the work that your organizations are doing, and I felt, inspired and joyous about hearing about the good things that are happening. So thank you. My name is Ramsey Ferguson. I am the market manager for Housing Connectors operations in Denver, the metro area of Denver, Colorado. My role at the organization is I manage most of our community partnerships that we have and relationships with local social service providers, government entities, and then I also oversee just the overall operations of our organization and our local community. Um, if you want to go to the next slide, Rebecca. Housing Connector is a national nonprofit organization. And so when you hear me say things like locally in Denver, it's because we operate in 7 other communities across the United States with goals to expand to a few more by the end of the year. Um, and we are an organization that works to serve in trying to solve the really thorny issue of how do we make housing more accessible for folks in our community who are experiencing housing instability. And then how do we work with our partners on the back end to ensure that folks are staying in their housing opportunities? And so when I talk about the work that we do and kind of how we approach it, I like to root into our why, our belief statement, which is we believe that no unit should sit vacant while there are individuals in our community that need a home. And so to give some context around that, I like to kind of describe the housing crisis as like a pie, right? And there's all these different pieces that make up that pie. There's the accessibility issue, there's the affordability issue, there's the um, quantity, if you will, or actual existence of units is also a part of that. And Housing Connector is really focusing on that access piece and then also that piece around like how do we help folks stay in those units once they're there. And so that is really the core of the framework of how we approach the way we work with properties and the way that we do our work in general. And so if you want to go to the next slide. In addition to that, we're really looking at this framework of what folks experience when they're kind of navigating their housing instability. And honestly, like, I don't think I need to labor this slide too much because I think Christian and Paul, like, as they were sharing, especially Christian, that last piece, this really speaks to what you were saying and kind of what we see happen in our communities, which is we might find folks in a housed situation, right? They're living rent burdened, they're paying, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income towards rent, and they're really not in that position to make any savings. Some instability moment happens, right? Medical emergency, crisis, mental health challenges, job loss that really rattles them off the track. And now we're seeing individuals in our community landing in an unhoused situation, which is oftentimes, I think, where most of us are catching these folks. Or, right, they're chronically homeless and they're sort of staying in this unhoused position that you can see on the screen. And so once they're in that space, right, we're as service providers, local, all of us here in this room are trying to connect folks to resources to get them connected to housing. But what happens is they're having a really hard time connecting to it because of a variety of different reasons, right? Affordability has come up a ton in this conversation. And then there's also this piece, which Christian was really speaking to around evictions. Maybe they have high renter barriers. The justice involvement piece, I think, is huge when folks are trying to fill out applications and get into units. And then what happens, right, is we just see folks continue to cycle through this space and it causes a lot of trauma, causes a lot of, yeah, I think people just sort of lose hope in that there's actually something that is available for them. And so if you want to go to the next slide. This is where Housing Connector's goal and kind of the framework of the work that we do comes into play. So we are partnering with properties to help support folks get approved for housing applications by reducing barriers during the application screening process. So asking properties to say, hey, can you lower some of these barriers around credit score requirements, rental history pieces, justice involvement, etc. Like all these pieces that I think we see a lot to help folks get into that housed opportunity. Where then, as an organization and with collaboration with our community partners, there are a few of our partners on the call today, we're really providing a safety net for these households to help ensure that they're maintaining that housing long term. And I'll talk about some of those prevention pieces in a later slide. But this sort of juxtaposition to what you just saw before is really what we're trying to do to break that cycle of folks experiencing instability and then getting really rattled off the track and returning back to homelessness. Next slide. So, in a nutshell, how we do this work is I like to think about it in terms of like three pillars, if you will, because there's really like three key like relationship points that make this all come together. And so on the front end, we establish relationships with properties by solving financial and residential challenges for them. Essentially, we're trying to incentivize them to work with us and stay connected in this work with us and with you all as community partners that we're serving. Once we establish those relationships, we then have to make those relationships and the vacancies that they have available to those in our community. So we have built a centralized hub where folks can engage in housing search in a centralized place where they can see all of that information around reduced barriers so that they can match their folks that they're serving more appropriately to units that will waive their rental barriers. And then the third pillar really brings everyone together, right? So it takes the property relationships that we've formed, it takes the community partnerships that we have with local nonprofits and providers, and then we all work together, right? Housing Connector, the providers, the property, we're all working together for one common goal, which is to keep folks in their units. And so that's the third pillar, if you will, to the work of Housing Connector. Really what I'm going to focus on today, and I think is the purpose of this training session, is around the property relationship piece. And so I'm really going to talk about in the next two slides around how Housing Connector is really serving as a bridge between the property partnerships that we form relationships with and the community partners who are trying to house folks in our community. Next slide. And then to kind of wrap it all up before I talk mostly about the property partnership piece, all of this is really backed by technology. And so our organization has a really heavy focus on tech tools. And we have a lot of wonderful supports from companies like Zillow to be able to do this work. We use Zillow to inform the platform that we've built for housing search. And then on the back end, we are gathering incredible data points at every point of the way to say, hey, community members, this is these are themes that we're seeing around early indicators for housing instability. These are themes that we're seeing around what might show somebody being more successful in a housing opportunity. And so we're constantly looking at that information to help inform the partners that we work with and the communities that we collaborate in. Next slide. So, to talk about the property relationship piece, when we started doing this work as an organization, we really took the position of putting on a business hat, if you will, and saying, if we're going to ask properties to work with us at this scale and to waive these barriers that, quite frankly, to them as businesses look like risks, how are we going to address that? And so we really took an empathy position and a curiosity position with engaging in relationships with properties to understand like what is it that they care about and how can we find common ground and like this collective work that we're trying to do. And so the four things that came up from properties that really mattered most to them, right, were filling vacancies. Depending on the type of property, it could be a tax credit property that has to meet certain vacancy standards to maintain their funding, or they could just be a market rate property that is a business and wants to make money and wants to make sure that their units get filled. Um, the other thing that mattered to them was collecting rent on time, so they would make sure that folks are paying rent. They also highlighted property care. So, like as a business, they want to make sure that, their assets, if you will, are being taken care of and respected. And then the fourth and final piece, which I think it's missed a lot in this work, is a thriving living community. And so, what we really realized from that piece is like a lot of times on-site property teams, they're in the work for the same reason that a lot of folks are in the work, like people on this call. Like we actually have more in common than you realize. They want to see people thriving in their living situations. They want to see people building community in the spaces that they live in. And they want to help people maintain their housing long term if they are running into struggles or really running into challenges. And so that was a really enlightening piece, I think, for our team when we were really starting to dig into this work. And all of these things, it's okay, Rebecca, you can go to the next slide. All of these things come together to really form how we engage with properties and the incentives and support that we can provide to ultimately, at the end of the day, right, get folks into housing and make sure that they stay there. So, um, when we looked at those things that came up, we decided to come up with what we like to call win-win solutions. We were really trying to focus on how can we create a structure that doesn't just benefit one stakeholder in this work, but ultimately at the end of the day is benefiting each group in a different way, and most importantly, that individual that we're trying to serve. And so, um, what we came up with as an organization very early on back in 2019 was we want to go to properties and we want to ask them to make it easier for folks to get into housing, and we want them to reduce their application screening criteria to be able to do that. And so we asked them, as I've already mentioned, to reduce things around credit score screening, debt, right? Like being flexible to work with certain levels of debt that folks might have, income to rent ratios, rental history requirements, folks who might have eviction histories, which was a really big big key thing, I think, from 2020 and where we are today. Justice involvement, so folks who might have that as well. And then voucher acceptance. Because we operate in communities across the United States, not all of our communities we operate in look at vouchers as a protected income source. And so we do have to address that piece in some of the other states that we operate in. That is thankfully not an issue here in Colorado. So, we go in with this ask. We can't go in with an ask and not offer something in return, especially when you're dealing with businesses. And so we came up with some solutions for housing instability, as well as kind of a framework for incentives in working with properties that helps make this all come together. And so what we're providing in exchange for this ask is 3 months of emergency rental assistance for any household that's enrolled in our program. So we're essentially saying to the property, like, hey, waive these barriers. I hear that you might be concerned about rent. We have this benefit that can address what in times when somebody might, right, like falter off of their plan to pay their rent, whether it's, you know, job loss, etc., that instability point that we've been talking about. We also provide damage mitigation funding it's almost like an insurance package, if you will, to properties to say, hey, like, again, we're asking you to waive these screening criteria pieces on the back end. We will provide this damage mitigation funding to subsidize experiences where somebody might damage a unit beyond what a security deposit could cover. And those two key things are really right. Those are those win-win solutions that we're talking about. The emergency rental assistance obviously benefits that individual who's in that living situation, helping them maintain their housing stability long term. And then the damage mitigation piece is really supporting in a couple of different ways in that if somebody does exit their tenancy and they've damaged that unit, if we can cover the costs, they're not going into another housing situation with those arrears in place. I think what this also covers, right, is a piece that Paul talked about, which was around like if you burn a bridge with a landlord, that kind of carries with you. And so having this damage mitigation funding piece, like, can oftentimes soften what might feel like a moment of like, you know, burning a relationships or breaking a relationship. We can kind of use this piece to leverage that to keep people in our fold. Um, and then the couple other pieces that I'll mention, and then I'll get us to the panel, is we provide a vacancy loss benefit to properties as well. So if somebody does need to exit their tenancy for whatever reason, we have this piece in place to help them turn that unit and get another renter in there. Um, and then I think the most important piece, and kind of at the end of the day, is like we're trying to make it as easy as possible for properties to be a part of this solution. We want them to be invested in helping folks in our community. And so a way that we do that is serving as a single point of contact for them. So as opposed to them trying to like scramble and figure out whose case manager is who when an issue arises during a tenancy, they can just reach out to us and we can loop in the right people to get that household the support that they need, as opposed to the landlord like trying to figure out like, oh my God, who am I supposed to talk to? So that, in addition to some of the financial pieces that we can provide, is a really, really big driver for a lot of the properties that we work with, because we're, again, just trying to make it we're trying to make it hard for them to say no, if you will. Um, so I will kind of close on that and talk a little bit more in the panel section about other ways that we dig in with folks. But thank you again for having me here today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ramsey. It is so refreshing and fun to hear about solutions and successes. And I think just really great info for folks. It's something that I think most programs struggle with wherever they are in their landlord relationship building. Yeah, continuum. So with that, we'll move into our panel questions. And again, I invite folks to pop your questions in the chat. And if it's something you'd like to come off mute for, we can certainly do that as well. So my first question is for Paul and Christian. So to orient folks who might be interested in developing new rapid rehousing programs in their communities, can you talk about some practical first steps they can take? And I'm going to go to Paul and then Christian next.
Sorry, I thought I was off mute and I
Okay.
wasn't. So like for me, there's a lot of different things. But one that kind of sticks out to me, especially so when I transitioned into being program manager for housing, I hadn't really worked in housing before. So for me, like one of the first steps I did was diving into the resources that are available around programs, policies, paperwork, and really like leaning into local, regional, and state resources that are available. So I had so many people that I was in contact with because these programs are out there. Like the rapid rehousing programs have been operating for a long time. People know ESG as kind of the basis for a lot of the programs. There's just so much knowledge out there, like within the community that you can tap into the peer networks, people that are excited about sharing what they know and things they've tried, successes, failures. It's so beneficial to just reach out to all of those different partners. And I remember for myself, like one of them, we had a Built for Zero champion who was part of one of the grants that ended up under Ojai for a while. And so I met with I don't know if anybody knows Summer Garcia, but I met with her probably every month for like 2 years. Just to really bounce ideas, just as a thought partner. And it wasn't necessarily specifically around rapid rehousing, but just having that person that had been kind of had a long history of working under the balance of state and in coordinated entry and just long experience in the homeless response system, it was pivotal. Like, I don't know, like I had so many questions for her starting off. It was nice to have that person. And I always felt like the state, um, at least the Department of Housing had done a very significant, I mean, with all of the people they have, I always felt very comfortable like reaching out to all of the support partners that we had, whether that was like for a specific grant and the program specialist, or even some of the other folks that were just at the state that were like, hey, if you have more questions, you should call this person or talk to this person. It was, so I would say just to continue that. Another thing that comes to mind that helped me kind of initially was, like I mentioned, like looking at uh some of the things that are just out there in the world. And so like the National Alliance to End Homelessness has a lot of toolkits and different things that are out there. There's one that's specific for rapid rehousing that's, 100 pages long that you can look through. I always thought that was a pretty good resource to like get an idea if our programs were somewhat on track with what others were doing with rapid rehousing programs. So that was also another thing that came to mind when I saw this question. So, and then I'll can give it over to Christian if he's got stuff to add.
Yeah, so thank you for talking about the whole partnership, Paul, because that's one of the things that we also did. So I actually talked to Marisa, who I said is the co-executive director, because even though I've been here at Mana for almost 4 years, I was not hired when they applied and got for the rapid housing program. So she did say getting in contact with a partner who already had a program to get guidance. So what we did was actually talked to Housing Solutions, and they were the ones who provided us with the intake paperwork. So they had their own rapid housing, and they let us take a look at their paperwork, and we based that to get our own intake forms. She also stated getting in contact with landlords and developing those relationships, which as we see uh, helps him immensely. So I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to make a small parenthesis. So here in Durango, Colorado, about 3 years ago, Purple Cliffs closed. So Purple Cliffs was a designated area here in La Plata where the county allowed people experiencing homelessness to camp. So they were allowed to camp there and no intervention from the police. But when they closed, they were not allowed to be there anymore. So what Mana did, we got a lot of money from Chafa to be able to house these a lot of these individuals. And when that happened, we put them into different hotels and motels and places. Anybody who had children, had a disability or have been a victim of purple clips. In Mana, among the landlords, we developed this reputation that everybody that was coming from Mana was just trouble. So we were just having a really hard time housing it. We had the money, we could pay. We were like, hey, you're gonna have guaranteed rent for 1 month, 2 months. And we're like, no, we don't wanna work with any, which is kind of discrimination. We don't have that on paper, but it was on verbally very obvious that no landlords wanted to work with anybody from Mana, which was it was very frustrating. It was really hard. So what we did is that we have to rebuild our trust from the ground. So we started working one-on-one with client with landlords being like, they're gonna have a dedicated case management. We're not gonna let them just house and then forget about them. If they damage something, we're gonna pay for that. So there were some damages done in some places worth thousands of dollars that we paid for after the event. So, and little by little, Mana built a relationship, being like, yeah, the population that we help are high needs. They might not be the easiest tenants, but we work with landlords, we work with case management, and then we can help pay with some repairs or whatever is needed to the extent that we can. So develop those landlords relationships. More on the number side, Marisa said, getting in contact with your accountant, making sure that you have enough money, because the way that you get paid sometimes in rapid housing is you don't get the money right away and then you spend it, you get it reimbursed. So you spend your money first, your own organization's money, and then you submit payments, and then the grant reimburse that money to you. So just she said, make sure that you have enough money to wait for that reimbursement. Accounting, getting appropriate selections through coordinated entry. Yeah, get a good partner, she said.
Great. And I love the focus you both have on that relationship building piece as well. And maybe you two will be the go-to for for other folks in the future. And Ramsey, I have a similar question for you. So for folks that might be getting started on landlord recruitment efforts, what do you recommend as some first steps for getting going?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what I'm going to say is somewhat duplicative of points that Christian just made. But what I will say is if you're building from the ground up, right? I think my first recommendation is to like understand the needs that you have for the folks that you all are serving. And this may be different in different community, right? In a rural community, you may not have the biggest pool of properties to kind of pull from versus in an urban area where there's right more saturation of that. But I think really understanding like who is the population that you are trying to house. And when I say that, I mean like, are we doing it at high volume? Are we serving a lot of families? Are we serving individuals? Are we working with folks with a lot of barriers? Because I think understanding that piece very clearly will help define your strategy in terms of how you're recruiting properties. So, for example, for Housing Connector, like we're trying to get biggest bang for our buck often, right? We are trying to recruit properties at a high volume so that we can serve lots of community organizations that we are working with. And so that takes a different approach than maybe in a smaller community where you're working with more individual property owners, small mom and pop type situation, which requires a whole different type of engagement level and strategy. And so, really knowing what you need before you go into those conversations, I think is really helpful, and understanding what it is that you are working with. If you have access to understand, like, what is the vacancy rate in my community? For example, here in Denver right now, we are in a nice spot for renters, maybe not price wise, but there is a lot of units available and properties are like really eager to get folks into their vacancies. So that would be my recommendation there. Other things that I might throw out is really understanding what you're able to offer to properties as, right, an incentive to work with you. If you don't have financials to be able to do that, saying like, hey, we'll fill your vacancies. I know that you need to fill your units. Like, we want to help you do that. I can get folks into your units within X amount of days. Like, honestly, you kind of have to put on a salesperson hat, I think, which I sometimes can be a little uncomfortable for those of us who are more social service inclined. It was a big learning curve for me. But I would say that that's a big piece of it. The other thing that I'll say is like, and I mentioned it in my slide, is you really need to be curious and build empathy. Like at the end of the day, these are people that are a stakeholder in this work with you. And you really need to understand their perspective to be able to have a really fruitful partnership. Understanding what their motivations are, what their challenges are that they face. They, at the end of the day, are a partner in this work. And so we, right, need to treat them like that. We need to show up for them. We need to share successes with them. We need to include them in brainstorming and troubleshooting. Like they are a part of this solution as well. And so I think that is a really key part. And I'll be really transparent. When I moved into this work, it was one of the hardest pieces for me because I was so client focused and so advocacy fierce, right? It was hard for me to flex into that space sometimes, but it is really important. And then the last thing that I will say is follow through. So when you form those first relationships, make sure that you are showing up. Fill those units as quick as you can so you can say, hey, remember I told you I was going to fill those units? I just did. And then once you build like those really strong relationships up front, they will then become your advocates and they will tell the other property, like, hey, Manor really shows up for me, man. Like you need to partner with them as well. So there's many more things that I think I could say, but those are the key pieces that I wanted to highlight.
That's amazing. That's really, really practical and helpful. Thank you. So the next question I have, in our work, we all have to identify challenges and then pivot and make improvements. So for Paul and Christian, if you were starting your rapid rehousing program today, is there anything you would do differently? And then for Ramsey, if you were starting your work today, is there anything that you would do differently? So lessons learned. We'll go to Christian and then Paul and then Ramsey, if that's all right.
So, so for us, going back to the selection process to coordinate entry, we'll definitely make sure. Well, I know that this is kind of a complex topic, going back with the higher needs for permanent supported housing and folks who need more of rapid housing, but we made that mistake. I will call it a mistake. We made that mistake in the past because as a caseworker, you work with folks who are in the streets for a long time. They come to your office and says, no one helps me. I'm never getting a house. And you want to help them. So just to get in, you have your doubts as a caseworker if this person is going to be successful in the program, but because you've worked with them for so long, you want to help them somehow that in the past we advocated for people for rapid housing that were not ready or whose needs were higher than rapid housing. And in the end, it was a lose-lose situation for everybody involved, for the landlord who had to evict the tenants, for the tenant who now went back to homelessness and now they have an eviction on their record, and for us that we couldn't show that this program does work when all the right elements are combined. So things that we would do differently is not let our advocacy made us select participants who not set up participants for failure. That's the best way that I can frame it. Select folks that have been out for a little bit or but that still have the skills to succeed. Like I have a participant who had been homeless for 3 years, but he still had work in those skills. And I remember him very, very vividly because he said that even when he was housed, he couldn't sleep because the transitions had been huge. So what his solution was to set up his tent in his living room and he would sleep inside the tent. And that's the only way that he could sleep under a roof. So he was homeless for 3 years, but he had the skills to make appointments, to go to the doctor, to apply for benefits, to do all the things on his own. So it really varies, but it helps us realize that really selecting our participants are the basis of making sure that they are successful, the program is successful, and they also landlords are happy to work with us in the future. And another thing that we would do differently would be also on the landlord tenant selection. So we were when we were new on this, we were just trying to house everybody anywhere, but then we found out that there are landlords who are more willing to work with people and who landlords who they're like not one complaint, two complaints for the neighbors and you are out. And since this is a small area, some of the landlords here they hold a lot of power. So even if they don't do things right, they push people out. So, but we learn like if a participant is gonna struggle into getting into housing and adapting to housing, we might be able to put them into this landlord who's more lenient, who's more willing to work with us versus this other landlord who's more strict. So I would say getting better with landlord tenant match for a better success.
Thank,
Um,
oh, go
so
ahead.
I have two things that kind of piggyback on both Christian and Ramsey a little bit. Christian had mentioned before that about rapid rehousing programs in general. They aren't always the best intervention for every single participant, right? Like there's some people that have a higher level of need. So I think like if I think we were falling into the category, especially at the beginning, where we were trying to house whoever was coming in the door, regardless of what their level of need was. And so, like looking back, I think that would be in consideration for sure is, are there other options that just serve this person a little bit better? That might look like assisted living. We run into that situation sometimes where somebody just needs that level of care that just being on their own in an apartment isn't going to provide for them. And so I think that's important. And then Ramsey, you mentioned just like I really love this idea of like how we empathize with landlords because I'm also in that category. Like I am there trying to advocate for my person. Our case managers are advocating for the people. We don't always necessarily look at like what are the needs. I think it's probably taken, 2 or 3 years before we kind of started delving into the realm of like how do we better engage with the landlords through this process and take the things that they're saying and actually listen to what their needs are? I think that would be another piece that we would kind of key on from the beginning if we could go back and change some stuff. And really some of those things came about because of the housing navigators that we have, just as they've kind of gone through. We've been lucky we've had the same housing navigators for uh, about 3 years. We've had two different navigators that have been here with Hilltop for 3 years. So like as they've gone and they've grown and developed their skills, I think they've found that that landlord engagement piece is super important to helping them to help people into housing. They have, nowadays they have several that they're in contact with quite a bit. There's also ones that were um, we've had a lot of trouble with, or we've heard very like negative reviews on that we've been able to build relationships with. And there was one tax credit property that we would send people there and they would never let a single person of ours in. Like it was like clockwork. We would submit paperwork on a person with a person and they would never get selected ever. And that's like through that process of building relationship, we've been able to actually get a few people into that one now. So and sometimes that, I mean, it did look like some change in management structure on their end. So maybe that helped us to be able to engage with them a little bit quicker than it was going with the existing people that were there. But we were really excited about the fact that we were able to get somebody into the place. And so, yeah, those two things stick out to me as things like if we could go back and change some stuff, we would probably look at those a lot more. to like from the very beginning, but sometimes you have to live it and learn and move forward, right? So can't go back now.
Um, yeah, I love that, Paul. I think sometimes we move so fast or we're just so focused on what's in front of us in this work that we sometimes have to stumble right into finding the answers or learning, what we wish we would have beforehand. So, um, I think what I will say around just like a lesson learned, is I think that piece around listening more, right? It is a value that my organization has and that I have and my team has, and that doesn't mean that we don't always do it the best, despite our trying. And so I think that piece would be like the lesson that I would focus on the most is like, just to give like a tangible example, we move really speedy at Housing Connector. We do a lot of things really quickly. And sometimes I think we make this assumption that like, oh yeah, we got the properties and they work. And like that's not always the case. And so um lately we have really been focusing on as a local team here in Denver of a team that works very, very deeply with rapid rehousing, that has a lot of unique sort of like needs in terms of paperwork and how you move somebody through that application process and lease up process. We've been really digging in with our partners to understand like where are the friction points? We've got the properties for you, but how can we help this go smoother? How can we help get people into these units quicker? What information can we help source from our property partners so that you, as a rapid rehousing provider or a navigator, has what you need to help like feel confident in moving through that application or lease up process with the individual that you are serving so that they also then feel really confident about the process and what's going on. So we've been really digging into just being curious and listening a little bit more and learning a little bit more specifically around that piece so that we're not making assumptions that we have formed the right property relationships when in actuality maybe we're missing something. So
Thank you all. I think we can all learn faster when we get to talk to folks about what they've learned before us. So appreciate that. My next question is inspired by a great conversation I had with Paul about the different um, funding that they have for rapid rehousing and how they're strategizing, how folks are, being put in through different programs. And so I'm going to start with Paul, I think, and then Christian for you to add on. Our question is, how do you approach utilizing your funding strategically to maximize the number of households served, ensuring program outcomes remain high, and then ensuring that funds are spent down? And then how do you determine the right amount and duration of assistance? So, Paul, do you mind taking away with that one?
Sure, yeah. So so I would just say like when Hilltop first started getting some housing funds around rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, we didn't have a large amount. Like it was smaller amounts starting off. And but what that taught us from the beginning was, what we need to incorporate into long-term procedures is that to allow funding to service the most amount of people possible, that we were going to have to work with outside participants and or funding sources, and that could look like churches and really about anybody else in our community that would provide any kind of assistance, to see if we could put a request in place where we weren't funding the full amount. So, that was huge. I mean, I think that's where we remain today. So we're always looking at what other funding is available in our community. How do we pair that with the funding that we have that can most effectively, for the most effective use of our dollars. And really at the end of the day, if we can save 100, 200, $500 from what the total is to move somebody into housing, that's just some money we have on the back end to help another household, to help another individual. Um, and yeah, and I think everybody, I mean, we have quite a few organizations in our areas that they don't necessarily have robust amounts of funds to assist with. So they're not coming in and saying, "Hey, we'll pay for everybody's rent or we'll pay for rent and deposit." It's more like a few $100s here, a few $100s there. Our navigators have got really good at making sure that people know what those resources are out there and that they can connect with them or we can get them connected with them. So there's some different ones that get utilized quite a bit. So like our local power co-op has they call it Operation Roundup. So like anybody in the community can round up their power bill to the nearest whole dollar, and then they throw all of that money into a community fund to be given out. And so like, they might have a few hundred up to maybe like $1,000 to help somebody with whatever it is they need help with. And so sometimes it's just directing them to that particular, like helping them fill out the paperwork and get a referral over to it and see if then we can combine that fund with what we have for our housing funds. And like I said, at the end of the day, if we're saving a little bit on each one, that just allows us to utilize those funds on the back end to assist another person, another family, or whoever it might be. Um, so really just stretching those dollars out as far as we can to cover as many people as we can. And then for the question for us, like a lot of times for us, the question around like how do we determine the right amount of duration of the assistance? Uh, to me, like operating under like person-centered care, it's really an individualized plan for us. Like we might have like a set, like we say a lot of times, like we can help up to 3 months or 6 months or some set amount of time. But when it all comes down to it, we're talking with the individual people about what assistance looks like for them and kind of basing it off of that. So, and I found that a lot of people like there's a huge like pride factor. Like the people want to get into housing, they want to accept the assistance that we're providing them. But there's a lot of people that are very anxious to take over that financial piece from us once they get to that point where they're like, I mean, I've heard people say a lot of times like, I want to be able to pay for my own stuff. I want to be able to pay for my own rent. Like that's something that's on their goal sheet. And so what we do with that with them too is just be very upfront with them and let them know like, hey, we do have some assistance and we can help you with some things, and tailor those plans to that specific person. And also a big part of that would be to let them know like, hey, if something happens, please contact us. Like get in touch with us. We'll be in touch with you. We'll follow up. Don't fall off the radar. Like please stay engaged. And sometimes that's other programs that we offer, getting them engaged with some of those for more long-term assistance. But at the end of the day, like back to that piece, what I was talking about, do they feel comfortable coming back to us and talking to us about something that's happened? Because I mean, everybody stumbles sometimes, and they can always contact us back and say, hey, this happened or that happened, and we may still be able to assist them or get them connected to other resources. So, like, although our programs have like a specific time frame, we use it more as like the maximum amount of assistance we're going to provide is up to 6 months. Um, but yeah, on an individual level, we do kind of work that through with the individual folks that we're working with and what their needs are. A lot of times it looks like, maybe we would help with deposit and 3 months rent, and then there's like a check back period to see where things are at. Or in some situations, it might look like a longer term that gets scaled down over time, but that's all kind of negotiated out from the beginning. So.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. And y'all, I'm doing a time check. We've had a great conversation today. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if I'm mistaken, Colin, can you let me know?
Yeah, there was one set of questions in the chat, and I think Ramsey replied to those in
Oh,
the
thank you.
chat and
Okay.
provided her contact info. So appreciate that, Ramsey.
Appreciate that. And I didn't want to cut you off, Christian, but I just wanted to kind of check in. Christian, did you have anything to add to that last question? And then I think we'll finish and wrap up.
I just want to say in our case, like very briefly, that the way that we do is like online organization, but we actually try to help at least 1 year. Our commitment is for one whole year, and the reason behind this is that most landlords, a lot of them, do leases for 1 year. So we definitely want to compromise to bring people to the end of the lease. So in case that they can no longer sustain the program, they don't end with an eviction. Like, oh, we're gonna help you with like 6 months, and they're not able to find employment or they get fired or whatever, then they get evicted. So when we got the grant, we made our budget, how much money we got, how we're gonna distribute things, and after all the numbers were in place, we said this is how many households we can have at this time in this period. And then if we disenroll somebody or someone else found housing or they move out or whatever, then we will readjust our budget for the next cycle to help at least always 1 year. And also regarding behind the scenes manager, so as I said at the beginning, we use THR and ESG, now Homeless Resolution Program. So we use THR to help pay for participants' needs, the rent, because THR is more flexible than HRP. So we use HRP to pay staff time and Thor to pay for like rent because it goes by beyond the sometimes fair market rent and stuff like that. So just like juggling the grants that we have to work with.
Great advice, all, and I wish we could stay longer, but I do have to watch our time. I know folks have to log off, so I do want to just thank everybody. First, please thank our panel. I really appreciate you all being here today. Everything that you shared. I hope folks can reach out to you after. I'm sure they will. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, Ramsey, Paul, and Christian, and then thanks everyone else for being here today. And as always, for those that have been here before, we have a quick survey that Cullen just launched. If you complete the survey, we'll enter you for a chance to win a $5 gift card as a thanks for your time. It helps us a lot to have your feedback on our learning circles and virtual assemblies. So thank you for filling that out. And then as we wrap up, just a reminder, today was our last session for the programmatic excellence pillar, and we will be sharing more information soon on the intentional inputs pillar, which is coming up next. So stay tuned for emails and calendar invitations so you can register for the next pillar, intentional inputs. And any final questions or anything from the group today? All right, thanks. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll stay here and keep the poll open for a few minutes so you can fill that out and enter for that gift card. And thank you, panelists. Thank you again.
Thank you.
No
Happy to be
worries.
here.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Rebecca, for getting this all set up. This is great.